At 2:17 a.m., Washington time, the signal changed. Inside the White House Situation Room, screens still glowed with satellite feeds, radar tracks, and projected strike paths. The plan had been written. The targets had been mapped. The order almost given. Then came the pause. On the 15th of the month, President Donald Trump issued an instruction that rippled outward like a shockwave through every capital in the Middle East. The attack on Iran was suspended, not cancelled, not abandoned, suspended. In military language, that single word carries weight. It means the finger is no longer squeezing the trigger, but it is still inside the guard. Within minutes, global newsrooms lit up. Analysts searched for explanations. Allies demanded clarification. Adversaries recalculated. President Trump made these remarks regarding the postponed executions in Iran. Take a listen today.
Urged protesters in Iran earlier this week to keep fighting in the streets and said that help was on the way. Is help still on the way, or has your bar
Well, we're
for
going to see.
intervention
As you
changed?
know, Iran canceled the hanging of over 800 people. They were going to hang over 800 people yesterday, and I greatly respect the fact that they canceled that.
Mr. President, Prime Minister...
Tehran-based prosecutor Ali Saleh stated these remarks.
U.S. President Trump tweeted and expressed his thanks that no action was taken against 800 of the individuals involved in these riots.
Well, Trump always spouts a lot of nonsense and baseless words. He is dead wrong. Our response is a decisive, deterrent, and swift response. And right now, a large number of our cases have resulted in indictments and have been sent to court.
Here is an Iranian activist living in exile, Mi Alinzad. She has spoken out against the ruling system for many years now, and because of this, the Ayatollah has allegedly attempted to have her killed on 3 separate occasions. Fortunately, U.S. law enforcement agencies managed to stop every single plot. But even so, she understands Iran more deeply than most observers. And this is her interpretation of the entire situation. Take a listen.
To be honest, everyone welcomed any decision to save the lives of those who were going to be executed. But in my opinion, the Islamic Republic knows it very well how to buy time. They have done this when it comes to negotiating with President Obama. They know how to buy time to rebuild, to recover. So now this is another case. When they promise that they are not going to execute protesters, that shows their fear. That shows that they understand the language of pressure. But this regime showed it years and years and years that they cannot be reformed. Killing is in the DNA of the Islamic Republic. I remember when the execution sentence of Navid Afkari went viral, President Trump reacted to that. He asked the Iranian regime to stop executing Navid Afkari. They did the same. They actually waited. But then what happened? They hanged Navid Afkari, the Iranian well-known athlete. So in my opinion, and the opinion of millions of Iranians who know this regime very well, that they are trying to buy time to rebuild and recover, and they will come back with more brutality. This regime cannot be reformed. They cannot change their behavior.
And now, this is where I want to turn attention to Iran's supreme leader, who has just delivered his first public address since Iran has effectively seen thousands of protesters killed. And believe this, in that speech, he openly acknowledges that yes, thousands of people, thousands of Iranians have died, but he claims it is not the fault of Iran or the IRGC. He insists the responsibility lies with the United States. Take a listen.
First, about the nature of the sedition. It was orchestrated by the U.S. It was obvious. The U.S. did the planning. They took action. And the U.S.'s goal, I say this firmly and clearly, based on my 40 years of experience in the Islamic Republic, that the U.S.'s goal is to devour Iran.
And yet, beneath the surface calm, the machinery of war did not stop. Aircraft remained fueled. Crews stayed at readiness. Naval formations continued their movement through darkened seas. This was not de-escalation. It was hesitation under pressure. What made this moment extraordinary was not only the American pause, but the voices urging it. Israel, the United States' closest regional ally, quietly signaled restraint. Arab capitals, often divided, spoke in rare unison. They warned Washington that one strike could collapse the entire regional balance. At 3:01 a.m., Middle Eastern air defense networks stayed alert. Iran watched the skies. The silence felt temporary. History has shown that wars often begin not with explosions, but with pauses that fail. Even as the order was paused, the board was not cleared. Far from Washington, steel moved through water. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln continued its approach, cutting a deliberate path toward the Indian Ocean. Its movement was not announced. It did not need to be. Satellites do not blink. In geopolitics, motion is language. The Lincoln did not represent diplomacy. It represented optionality, the ability to act without warning. Fighter squadrons slept beneath its deck. Missile cells remained sealed but ready. At this same hour, Iranian command centers tracked every nautical mile. They understood the message clearly. The pause was political, not military. Pentagon planners kept strike scenarios alive. Digital maps remained open. Contingency trees were not deleted, only minimized. This duality defined the moment. Public restraint, private preparation. History offers a pattern. When deterrence becomes visible, miscalculation becomes lethal. Every movement invites interpretation. Every interpretation invites response. The Middle East has learned this lesson too many times. While fleets shifted at sea, the streets of Iran told a different story. On the night of the 15th, Mashhad, Iran's second-largest city, fell unusually quiet. The protests that once filled intersections thinned. The chants faded. Here is a protester who escaped Iran, explaining how the crackdown began. Take a listen.
No one would speak on camera, afraid of the regime's watchful eyes. But one man with injuries on his face told us he was shot at a protest in Alborz province last week.
I was hit in the face by around 7 pellet rounds. They struck above my eyelid, on my forehead, my cheek, my lip, under my ear, and along my jaw. I had to use a razor blade to cut one of the pellets out. 5 are still stuck in my face. I was too afraid of being arrested to get medical help.
Iran's security forces had crushed protests in his own town, he told us, but some in other areas had continued.
Demonstrations were still continuing in Fardis, Malard and some areas of Tehran. My friends were there. We were constantly on the phone. On Tuesday night, the protests were still going on, but I haven't had any updates since then.
Despite this, the Iranian foreign minister appeared on US television and told a global audience that the death toll was not that high. Those were his words, not mine. He claimed that only hundreds of people were killed, not thousands. But here's the twist. He was later exposed for misleading the public by none other than Iran's own supreme leader. Just take a listen.
About the situation on the ground. There are reports, sir, that anywhere from 2,500 to more than 12,000 protesters in various cities have been killed by the regime. How many people have been killed?
Well, we are on the ground in Iran. Those, claims are baseless. There is no proof of that. The number of deaths, although they tried hard to increase the number of deaths, are only hundreds.
In this sedition, these ignorant and unaware agents, led by those malicious and trained elements, have murdered several thousand people. They killed some with inhumane severity, meaning completely savagely.
On top of this, we have now also learned that the Iranian regime may have used chemical weapons against its own citizens during the protests. A member of a UK foreign policy group just stated this based on a credible report he received. Take a listen.
A member of the Labour Foreign Policy Group, and I received a report just before we came on air tonight. I hasten to add, this is not verified yet, but it's a credible report to me, and it says the city's prison is overcrowded with detained and arrested protesters. The court halls are filled with families of detainees, and no lawyers are being allowed to defend those who have been arrested. People believe that some kind of toxic chemical substance has been used against protesters, causing some of the injured to lose their lives days later. The number of those killed and injured is very high. If that is true, I think that's extraordinarily concerning.
Wow. So just to clarify on that then, Bill, the information that you seem to be getting there is from a credible source, so that the Iranian regime, the Ayatollah, might have used some sort of chemical weapon against their own people, against protesters, and we are now seeing a delayed reaction to that then. So a few days on from that, a couple of days on from that, and now we're starting to see loss of life as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's history in this part of the region. You look at Saddam Hussein, who used gases against 5,000 people in Halabja and murdered them brutally, and I fear this has got real echoes of that.
Well, and where is our red line on this? Where is Trump's red line on this? I suppose that's the more pressing question, really, given that he would unquestionably be the one who would launch the first strike if there is one. If this is true, no reason to doubt it. If this is true that chemical weapons have been used on the Iranian people by the regime, I think all of that might be the sign to do something.
But the key question is, what do you do? Because it's very different externally, and I was part of it in government. Foreign intervention sometimes have adverse consequences.
Yeah, I just think it's just got a nightmare written all over it. And the thing is, if Trump goes in, are we looking at what are the consequences? Are we looking? It's very, very volatile in the Middle East in so many aspects of the Middle East. Are we looking at a monumental escalation towards World War III? I don't know. It's terrifying. And what upsets me, and I think we always need to remember that in the middle of all this are people and families and kids, and it's just heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking.
But the silence was enforced. Armored vehicles rolled through main roads. Police lights painted walls red and blue. Soldiers stood at intersections with weapons low, but visible. This was not peace. It was containment. Video fragments leaked despite restrictions. They showed something more unsettling than chaos. Control. Tight formations. Coordinated patrols. Preemptive dominance of space. Elsewhere, another clip surfaced. The location was unclear. The message was not. Masked protesters gathered under streetlights, voices rising together against authority. Their numbers were smaller, but their defiance sharper. Authoritarian systems fear crowds less than they fear persistence. Tehran understood this, and it acted accordingly. On the night of the 14th, Iran closed its airspace. To the trained eye, this is not routine. It is a reflex learned through decades of threat. Commercial flights diverted, radar corridors emptied, the sky prepared for intrusion. Sources later revealed what many suspected. A U.S. strike had been imminent. Orders were drafted, timelines aligned, assets synchronized. Then came the intervention. 4 Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, and Egypt, activated emergency diplomacy. They warned both Washington and Tehran that escalation would not remain bilateral. One strike would become many. The pause followed hours later. In war planning, this is called a near miss. January 17th loomed like a deadline written in ink. Iran had signaled its intent to carry out mass executions, up to 800 individuals accused of participating in unrest. The world braced for irreversible consequence. Then, just hours before the scheduled moment, the trajectory shifted. President Trump announced that Iran had postponed the executions. One sentence, no details. Behind it stood coordinated pressure, diplomatic threats, military proximity, and economic consequence. One young man, Soutani, was spared. His sentence commuted. His life extended. He became a symbol, not of mercy, but of leverage. At approximately 8:40 p.m. Jerusalem time, a secure line opened between Tel Aviv and Washington. No cameras, no statements, only calculations. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not argue emotionally. He spoke clinically. He told President Trump that a strike on Iran at this moment would not achieve regime change. It would achieve something else, uncontrollable escalation. Israel's concern was immediate and physical. Iranian missile stockpiles were not theoretical numbers on a briefing slide. They were deployed systems spread across hardened sites, mobile launchers, and underground complexes. Even with layered defenses, Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, no shield guarantees total interception. At 9:02 p.m., Israeli defense planners modeled retaliation scenarios. Missile saturation overwhelmed perfection in every simulation. Civilian casualties rose sharply after the first wave. This was the reversal of a familiar pattern. For decades, Israel had urged decisive action. Now, for the first time in this crisis, it advised delay. At 9:19 p.m., the warning landed at the White House, not as fear, but as probability. Deterrence, Israel argued, only works when consequences are survivable. This time, they might not be. The call ended without a decision, but the silence afterward carried weight. By 11 p.m. Washington time, Pentagon assessments were circulating internally. The tone was blunt, almost cold. The force posture in the region was insufficient for decisive war. 6 surface combatants, limited fighter squadrons, no massed ground presence, no redundancy. Iran, the briefing stated, was not Iraq in 2003. It was a state that had spent decades preparing for asymmetric survival. Hardened infrastructure, dispersed command, redundant leadership. At 11:27 p.m., planners ran strike simulations. Even a launch of 400 Tomahawk missiles produced limited strategic effect. Air defenses degraded, but not collapsed. Command nodes damaged, but not decapitated. The comparison surfaced repeatedly. Ukraine. Firepower without political collapse. Attrition without resolution. At 11:54 p.m., the conclusion was clear. Power existed. Victory did not. At 6:12 a.m., local time near Palawan, satellite imagery captured the moment. USS Abraham Lincoln altered course. The turn was subtle, just degrees on a chart, but its meaning was unmistakable. The carrier aimed toward the Malacca Strait, the gateway to the Indian Ocean. This was not a drill, not a routine transit. At cruising speed, the Lincoln would arrive in weeks. At flank speed, days. Nuclear propulsion erased logistical delay. Fuel was irrelevant. Endurance was assumed. At 6:47 a.m., regional naval commands updated threat assessments. The pause in Washington now had a shadow. By mid-morning, the full formation was clear. 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanked the carrier, their Aegis systems fully integrated. Radar envelopes overlapped. Missile cells stood sealed but primed. Below the surface, an attack submarine moved without signature. No flag, no name. This was the invisible layer, the one never discussed publicly. At 10:18 a.m., maritime analysts confirmed what the region already knew. This was no longer signaling. This was posture for action. At dawn on the U.S. East Coast, USS George H.W. Bush departed Norfolk. At nearly the same hour, the Theodore Roosevelt prepared for extended operations in the Pacific. 2 oceans began to move. History recognizes this configuration. It is not defensive, it is preparatory. By 34 minutes, analysts used a familiar term, a pincer. As fleets moved, the skies followed. Fighter squadrons redeployed. Tankers stretched range. Electronic warfare aircraft filled invisible corridors. At 2 a.m. on the 18th, planners marked a deadline. By month's end, air dominance had to be achievable within hours, not days. Control before contact. Inside Iran, the streets grew quieter. Repression worked. By the final days of the month, the protests that once promised internal fracture were nearly gone. The strategic window narrowed. Strike early, underprepared, or strike later, alone. This was the dilemma facing the White House. History does not forgive indecision, and it never forgets who hesitated when time ran out.